Welcome to Plant Week. This is where we are going to confuse everyone, including ourselves, about plants. We're covering 7 families this week. We're going to give you some info about where the names come from for each of these families, how many species are in them, all that kind of stuff. Some of the ecosystem services that maybe these species provide from each of these families. And so stay tuned.
A couple things you might want to have on hand before you do any keying. This is called a loop, sometimes called a jeweler's loop. It's what jewelers use to look at gems and metals and stuff. But it's also a very common tool that botanists use. Really excellent for looking at anything up close. You hold this very close to your eye and very close to whatever you're looking at. Later on, I'm going to actually tape this to my phone and try to show you some stuff up close. So this is a really cool tool to have. Also sometimes called a hand lens, but a loop is the other term for it. Field notebook, always good to have, writing down what you're doing in the key. So in the Jepson, there's a dichotomous key, and it's really helpful to write down each step that you're taking so that you can trace your steps back if you don't end up on the right thing. You can kind of find where you went wrong. So always good to have when you're keying out stuff or just in the field looking at plants, sketching flower shape, leaf shape, that kind of thing. Another thing for keying, some of the stuff is so specific and really like in-depth stuff, so having little tweezers and mini scalpels and stuff to pull apart petals or seeds or the ovary, like these are really helpful tools. And then of course a ruler. A lot of stuff in the Jepson is based on millimeter lengths of stuff, so having a ruler is super important. This stuff is kind of extra, but really helpful if you're getting down into the nitty-gritty. Alright, we are going to talk about the largest plant family in the world, Asteraceae, also known as the aster family, the daisy family, or the composite family. And this is a huge family. It has over 23,600 species in the world, with over 1,620 genera. Many of these plants in this family have a compound flower or a composite flower, and that basically means that it may look like one flower, but it's actually made of many florets. One of my favorite things about this family is that once you realize what common characteristics for Asteraceae plants look like, you'll notice them everywhere. So I was just walking on the path and looked, and here we have yarrow, that's an aster, Grindelia stricta, gum plant, Symphyotrichum chilense, Pacific aster, lizard tail, mugwort right here, it's not flowering, but that's an aster, coastal sagebrush, coyote brush, also not flowering. So here I have some aster flowers in this jar. I'm going to show you guys them, and then I'm going to attach my hand lens to my camera and see if I can get some close-up shots of those compound flowers. So some of these are made up of both disc flowers and ray flowers, and some are just made of ray flowers. So here we have some lizard tail, and you can probably see it. The centers here are made up of a bunch of little disc flowers, and then these petals are actually called ray flowers. And each little component of this flower has its own reproductive part. So really small little flowers in there. This is Pacific aster, Symphyotrichum chilense, with a bunch of disc flowers on the inside and the ray flowers on the outside. If you can see that, each of these petals, these ray flowers, have little reproductive parts, and then when they are ready to seed, they'll produce an achene like this. and then all this, the hairy stuff, is called pappus, and so these are often wind dispersed, and that fluffy pappus helps with that, so it catches the breeze and floats away, and that's how the seeds are dispersed. And so the akene is this hard little single seed, and you can, the most common thing that you guys might know of is like a sunflower seed, so that's an akene. This Grandelia stricta gum plant is also a like classic daisy with a bunch of disc flowers in the center and then the ray flowers on the outside. So that's a very classic Asteraceae characteristic. And then also same with this yarrow, Achillea millefolium, which is one of my favorite plants we have at the reserve. Really nice, feathery leaves, and then again, this is like an umbel of these compound flowers, and then inside each of these flowers are a bunch of little florets. You can see that each of these little flower-like structures, these compound flowers, have a cluster of disc flowers in the center and these ray flowers on the outside. So if I were to pluck one of these off, that has its own reproductive parts on it, and then same with all of these little flowers in the center. So yeah, those are some of the ones. And then this one I wanted to point out, this is a weed we have here. It's called common cat's paw, or Hypocharis radicata. And this is an aster, but it's only made of ray flowers, so there are no disc flowers in the center like all of these have, just ray flowers. So each of these, what you might have thought was a petal initially, is its own ray flower, and it has its own reproductive part. Alright, really quick I want to show you this weed we have here. It's an aster, and it's made of both types of, actually I think these are just ray flowers, and then it created this puffball of seeds. So remember, all those achenes, the seeds, had that pappus, the fluff on it. So each of these have, all those are seeds, and the hair is what they are dispersed by. So whenever you see a fluff ball like this, like a dandelion, that's just like a huge clump of seeds. Another family a lot of you may be familiar with is Brassicaceae. So the Brassica family, or some people call it the mustard family, and this is the family that is responsible for many of our crop species. So cabbage, kale, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, kohlrabi, turnips, rutabaga, all of that is in this family. So it's a very economically important crop, and it's probably the most domesticated and scientifically altered family of plants we have. A lot of the plants in this family are sometimes referred to as crucifers because they are cruciferous, and that basically means cross in Latin, and you can see why it's called that because of these petals. They form a cross, and a lot of brassicas have that classic 4-petal, 4-sepal flower structure. So anytime you see 4 petals, there's a good chance it's a brassica. And you can see this on wild radish, which is what I'm holding right here. And then also over here on this mustard plant. So again, 4 petals, 4 sepals. And the leaves actually look really similar on both plants. So here is a mustard leaf, a radish leaf. So very similar. If you were to eat the leaves, the flowers of this plant, they're very peppery, kind of tastes like a radish. Imagine that. Seed pods in this family, in the brassica family, are known as siliques. At least the long and skinny ones are called siliques, and then there are short, rounder ones that are called silicles. But this is a very common thing that you'll see on a brassica plant. And inside here, little seeds, if you can see them, kind of like a bean pod, but again, this is not the bean family. That's Fabaceae. This is the brassica family. So these seeds, compared to like asters and a lot of other plants, they don't produce nearly as many seeds, but they produce a good amount. And this is one of our most common weeds on the reserve. So wild radish, it can grow pretty big if you let it be for a long time. In their roots, they form these tap roots, which are like big, imagine like a carrot that's similar to a taproot, and the longer you let them sit, the bigger they get. A lot of our crops, like Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, kale, broccoli, those are all the same exact species called Brassica oleracea, and they've just been kind of modified to have all these different subspecies, and those subspecies are the different crops that we get. Something kind of cool about wild radish, even though it's a weed, it can come in a variety of colors. So a lot of different brassicas come in white, yellow, lavender. Those are kind of main colors of brassica plants, but this one in particular can come in white, yellow, pink, purple, like magenta, mauve, and it's so interesting because they're all the same species, and sometimes people get confused. They're like, oh, what is this? But it's just radish.
Welcome to a species from the family Fabaceae. The Fabaceae, it's the pea family, and one of the largest plant families out there. I think it's the third largest family, after the Orchidaceae and the Asteraceae, the sunflowers. So, and I guess what big means, somewhere around 750 genera. This is the species we're looking at right now, or this genera is lupinus. So lupins, hopefully everybody knows those. Yeah, 750 genera, somewhere around there, 19,000 species. That's something around 7% of all flowering plants is in the family Fabaceae. All right, we're taking a quick jaunt up to Upper Campus UCSC looking for more plants in the family Fabaceae. So right away, coming in, this guy, this is another species of lupin, and I believe this is Lupinus bicolor. I might be wrong, and if I'm wrong, I'm gonna put something down on there. But these guys are kind of tough. They key out kind of late in the key, and we're gonna talk about keys in a second. But in Latin, faba means bean. And there used to be a genus called Faba in this family. And that was changed to Vicia, which is the genus of this species. This is Vicia sativa. It's a non-native bean that we have here. It's a weed. But something interesting about it is that it has a mutualistic relationship with ants a lot of times. And so you can see these guys, there's some ants on here, and they're kind of clustered around these black dots. Those black dots are actually called extrafloral nectaries. And instead of having nectaries within the flower, like a typical pollinator flower would have, these guys have the nectaries outside the flower, and they're really just trying to attract these ants in to these nectaries, and the ants in turn make sure that there aren't any pests on these plants. They clean off aphids and things like that. Something else that is really common in the Fabaceae family is that they have nodules on the roots that assist in nitrogen fixation. And so there's a symbiotic relationship with a nitrogen fixing bacteria in the roots. And you know, a lot of the nitrogen is in the air, in the atmosphere that we have. And this is one way how this family has figured out how to take nitrogen from the air and actually fix it into the ground and directly use it from its roots. The great, the one and only Hosakia gracilis. And it's small. This is not a big flower. Here's a millimeter ruler. These things are, 5 millimeters, something like that, wide. I mean, they are tiny. So first off, we know this is in the Fabaceae family. It's got these characteristic fabaceous flowers. So all the Fabaceae, I think pretty much all of them, not all of them, that's not true, but most of them have these bilaterally symmetric flowers. It's also called a zygomorphic flower. And they're even kind of more different from all the typical zygomorphic flowers in that they have a really specific flower structure. So up the top here, this yellow part, this is called the banner. And it's kind of the top petals, and then we've got, usually, these guys might have a weird... Okay, cool. So these two pink ones, these are called the wing petals. And then down below on this species, it looks like they are reduced, but this is called the keel, just really small. So, and the keel's composed of, I think, 2 flowers that have been fused together. So all in all, 5 petals, but they're hard to see, they're hard to tell, which makes this family kind of an interesting one. But we know because of that, and it has these pinnate leaves, which is classic for this family, that this is in the family Fabaceae. So one last lupin that we have around here is Lupinus arboreus. It's the yellow bush lupin, and it's a bush. It's not some little tiny plant, and it's got a great example of all these flowers. Definitely that zygomorphic flower structure, and you can see we've got the banner up top, and then these wings, and this is kind of cool because when you push on the wings, that horn, which is made up of the keel flowers, is exposed, and all the parts of the flowers in there.
Plant families that you'll see flowering through most of the warm season at Younger Lagoon is this group, which is Frumiaceae. This right here is Diplodocus aurantiacus, or it was formerly known Mimulus aurantiacus, or sticky monkey flower. And as you can see, they're certainly pretty distinct flowers, and especially like really common in the chaparral, but also in the coastal prairie you find a lot of these. So when you're driving over 17 to come to Santa Cruz, you will see a lot of these on the side of the road right now, just like big specks of gold color. So some of the defining characteristics of Frumiaceae, you have these flowers that are pretty distinct in that they are this really tubular shape. As you can kind of see here, it's this long corolla tube, which is this area right here. And as well, another defining characteristic is that they have these toothed lobes. So as you can see, it's got this really lobe flower. It's a bilateral symmetry, which means that you can divide it down the center, and it's the same on each side. So those are all definitely really giving characteristics of this family. Similarly, they have stigmas with 2 lamellas that close up on the pollinator when they are coming in. So as you can see, the stigma is kind of divided and has these 2 split heads. It's fused together, which means that it's one in its own. Yeah. Some other interesting facts about Frumiaceae is that there's 11 different genera. It has a worldwide distribution, but a majority of those species are within the United States as well as Australia. So the capsules are locucidally dehiscent, which means that they split at the partitions of the ovary. So here is the flower up close. It's always good to really interact with the plant, so when you get it or see one, definitely come in and like peel it open, cut it up, just kind of take a look at it. So you can see the stigmas right there, and the anthers are down here. You can see it's got quite a bit of pollen on it. There's a little bit of nectar down at the base, and it appears to be I think a dominant ovary. But so this is another member of the Fermiaceae. Used to be classified with the sticky monkey flower when they are both under Mimulus, although they've been split, and now this is Erythranth. So it definitely differs from Diplodocus a little bit in that it has these hairy corolla tubes, which is a definitely interesting characteristic of these guys. Also, another cool thing about these is that they are a wetland species. So when you're driving down one and you see all these kind of seep areas off the side of the road and bright yellow flowers, you're pretty much looking at these most often. They're super pretty flowers. They're very herbaceous and super brittle, so they break super easy. Definitely really, really nice one to have in our restoration sites. And one interesting thing is that the seeds are similar in that it's an alocucidal cap, but the seeds are tiny. So you just basically have this dust that spreads out everywhere and lots of potential for recruitment. It's a really great species. Ranunculaceae is definitely a pretty interesting genus. This species right here, Ranunculus californicus, is almost kind of considered a weedy species just because it thrives so much in agricultural situations where they don't want this to grow. But in our grassland ecosystem, this is such a great plant to have around. It's super showy, it's really bright, and it kind of brings a lot of color to these grassy areas that are often kind of overlooked. Yeah, it's definitely a super important plant. It usually has, or I guess Ranunculus has two different forms of pollination. There's wind as well as insect pollinated. This species is insect pollinated, and sometimes you'll see beetles or other flying insects on here pollinating these plants, so keep your eye out. It's something you might see around in grasslands in Chaparral and coastal California. One of these that is a little bit difficult to find unless it's blooming is this right here, which is Sidalcia malviflora, or checker bloom. It's a pretty common looking Malvaceae, which is a pretty big family, and one that is also shared with chocolate. Chocolate trees are in the Malvaceae family, which is pretty interesting. But some of the key characteristics associated with the Malvaceae is that they have alternate leaves, which means that when you are looking at the stem and the leaves, you'll notice that the leaves are not directly opposite of each other, but kind of stagger. So there's one down lower, another one up higher on the opposite side, and it kind of follows that pattern all the way up to the top. This thing called a bicolor unit, which is that striping pattern. They're always pretty consistently have this interesting coloration pattern. So within Malvaceae, you have plants that are tropical and subtropical, so the distribution is kind of focused along some of the more temperate regions, and within that there are 250 different genera. We have quite a few here. A lot of them are not native, although there are some species like this one right here that is native. So there's also some really cool vernal pool species, which are just really showy. So check it out. Look at this sweet pollinator checking out these blooms. Yeah, everyone likes them. They're super, super pretty. Definitely get up close and check them out. So here's another mallow species that we have on the reserve, but unfortunately this one is really invasive. This one kind of shows up in a lot of our plots, depending on, well, it really kind of just shows up in a lot of our dry grassland plots. As you can see, it's still got some pretty cool flowers. It looks pretty good. They're a little bit larger than the Sidalcia malviflora that we have on the reserve, but this one is super woody. Like the one we have is pretty herbaceous, so you can pretty much snap it pretty easily. This one is really fibrous, really woody, and just a monster to get out. It has a huge taproot. This thing is ginormous. They really get super big. They're definitely not something you want around. They'll mess up the mower. They're just kind of a mess for sure. And look at how much seed they're about to put out. That also has like a capsule like seed head.
Hi, I'm Justin, and today we're here at Younger Lagoon to learn a little bit more about the grass family, also known as Poaceae. So the word Poaceae actually comes from the ancient Greek word poa, which means fodder in English. And fodder is another word for food, especially food that's given to livestock in the form of dry hay or grass. The grass family is one of the most diverse families in the world, and it's actually the 5th most diverse family. It has nearly 780 genera with nearly 12,000 species. In California alone, we have 535 grass species, and about 230 of those are introduced species, and 290 of them are native. And that falls within 144 genres. Grass species can be really important in California because they create all kinds of super diverse habitats that support really rare wildflowers and all kinds of other species. Grasslands, especially native perennial grasses, can also be really important for carbon storage, especially in semi-arid regions like we live in, where the water table may not necessarily be high enough for mass tree plantings. Grasses also are really important for our global food system, and they actually account for nearly 50% of all human dietary intake. And 20% of this comes from rice, 28% of this comes from wheat, and about 6% of this comes from corn. The rest of it comes from other rice-type crops. A lot of grasses have also evolved with disturbance, like fires, and also large grazers, which may no longer be present. And they may actually require these disturbances to persist throughout time. This is purple needlegrass, also known as Stipropulchra or Nacelopulchra, and it's actually our state grass. And it even has its own Instagram page. Some key features is that it's a perennial bunch grass. So if you look at the grass, it will be bunchy at the base and will have a lot of different stalks. It also has these purplish gloom that kind of gives it its distinct name, purple needlegrass. Next we have a similar looking grass, but it's non-native and is a really large, a species of large concern. So this is ripgut brome, also known as Bromus diandrus, and it can look kind of similar to purple needlegrass sometimes. So one easy way to tell it apart when it's seeding is to hold it up by its awns like we have here, and then try to run your fingers down it. And when you do that, you'll kind of notice you won't be able to, because it's called ripgut brome. It has these little barbs on its seeds, and when you try to run your fingers down, those little barbs actually catch on your fingers and you can't actually run your fingers down. And so that's ripgut brome, and not to be confused with purple needlegrass. We also have some other native grasses here. So here we have Bromus carinatus, California brome, which is actually a native brome, and it's perennial. You can see it's pretty tall, and it actually has its flowers open. And so here we can see some key features of the flower again. For example, we have those little yellow things, which are the anthers, and the white feathery appendages are the stigma, which are the female parts, which eventually bring pollen down to the ovary and be hardened and become the seed. We also have some other common grasses you might encounter at Younger Lagoon. This one's a non-native. This one is wild oat, Avena. And then we also have another one here, Bromus hortiaceus, or soft chest brome. It is really compact for a brome, and if you feel it, it's actually really soft, which is where it gets its common name.